Now joined by David Katz. He's the CEO of Global Security Group. David, thank you for your time. Now, blame has been spread across every law enforcement agency responding to the attack. Who and how do you think is responsible for this horrific failure, and how should they be held accountable?
Well, the failure was systemic, and I'll start with some of the points that the reporter earlier just raised. There are debates pro and con of the gun control issue, and I'm going to leave that aside for the minute. We all, whatever political party you're a part of, we all understand that whatever your position on firearms control is, certain people should not have access. This person had given enough warning to society to say, basically, I am not fit to own any sort of firearm or any dangerous instrumentality. So that's one. The school has its share of blame. I was looking at the video, and there's 3.5 minutes between the first shots fired outside the school until the gunman walks into the school. Part of the training that we do a tremendous amount of active shooter response training all over the country. In fact, we've done it for all the U.S. branches of Bank of China. Individual initiative is critical, which means the moment you become aware as an individual that there are shots being fired, the presence of an active shooter, you act. In this case, the protocol should have been all students locked in their rooms, the exterior doors locked, wait for the police response. That was not done. Now, the police response was equally pathetic. Now, most of the children, tragically, were probably shot prior to the arrival of the first officers. However, that is no excuse for not going in and making contact. If you have a child who's wounded, bleeding, they need to have assistance immediately. And there is no protocol in any law enforcement agency in the United States right now that I'm aware of that says anything other than you make contact with the shooter, take the shooter out. That was not done.
What about the police chief, Pete sorry to interrupt you there. What about the police chief, Pete Arredondo? He said he didn't consider himself the incident commander, even though police officers said that they thought he was. And he also co-authored the active shooter response plan, which states directly that he would be should something like this happen. What's your take on the way Arredondo has responded and managed the fallout to all of this?
To call Arredondo incompetent is being charitable. He was in no way, shape, or form ready to handle a situation like this. And frankly, for the senior officer on the scene to say, well, I didn't consider myself scene commander, it's indefensible. That being said, we can all agree that Arredondo was not a capable leader, was not a tactical officer. However, tactical teams did arrive. Tactical officers arrived, and senior police officials with more experience and ability, they arrived, and yet they didn't say to the chief, who was the chief of what? The school district. School district police are not. They're not equipped for these things. Some are who were drawn from law enforcement agencies with this type of training. This individual was not. Other more qualified officers were there. They could have said, let me help you out, I'll take charge. That wasn't done.
So you've obviously got a lot of experience in this sort of thing, setting up these security protocols for schools and groups to follow. But at what point can you really expect something like this to work when it comes down to the individual? I mean, when you look at some of that footage and you see those police officers wanting to do something, backing away, running away even, perhaps at the sound of gunshots, who knows? At the end of the day, it comes down to humans, their capabilities and their willingness to be able to be responsible for what they know they're supposed to do.
It comes down to training, comes down to selection. Officers, any officer that's worthy of the badge needs to understand that in a situation like that, your life as the officer is second to the lives of the children. There is no backing up.
So then how come not one of those nearly 400 police officers didn't have that thinking when it came to this moment?
That is something I cannot answer, because there is no doubt. I mean, finally, the Border Patrol Tactical Team, BORTAC, they just, I'm not sure what prompted them to actually move forward, but they moved in heedless. They didn't have armor, they didn't have shield, they had good body armor, they didn't have shields. They moved in and took them out. But those first officers had to have them back away without engaging and trying to assault the shooter. It's indefensible. You assault the shooter at risk of your own safety. If you go down, the second cop gets him. If the second cop goes, we keep throwing bodies at the shooter until we take the shooter out. And why? Because the result is 19 dead children.
So perhaps let's circle back to the point that you wanted to leave aside initially. Here we are with nearly 400 officers who are trained with firearms, perhaps used to and understand the risk of their jobs, unwilling to put their lives at risk for their jobs. And yet we have an 18-year-old, somewhat child, go out and buy a military-style weapon, very capable of being able to shoot up a classroom of children, regardless of the fact that he's never had training before. How can we avoid this argument when really what it comes down to is the fact that this 18-year-old was able to get a gun and 400 police officers weren't able to stop him?
Yeah, because for whatever reason, one side is, well, we're not going to restrict access to firearms at all, which is absurd. But equally absurd is we're going to confiscate all weapons. I have absolutely no fear of my fellow law-abiding citizen owning a rifle, semi-automatic rifle. I don't care. I've owned one since I was 16. It is the weapon in the hands of someone who is either mentally unstable or evil. That's what
it's
we need to
incredibly
focus on.
difficult to control a population of this many millions of people and to know who's got mental health issues. But when they can readily go out and buy a firearm in the way that Ramos did, I mean, you can't control that.
No, that's absolutely no. That's let me correct you. Ramos gave plenty of notice to everyone. School administrators, the law enforcement officers were well aware of him. They've been to his house a number of times. He had mental health issues. They were well aware of this.
So do about 20 people in most schools.
Sorry?
So do about 20 people in most schools. How are they to know that he's going to go out and buy a gun?
It doesn't. That's not the point. The point is, and by the way, he was displaying behavior that is consistent with others who've committed acts of violence. The point is, once you have someone who comes to the attention of law enforcement and mental health professionals, there needs to be a database someplace which basically says, if this person attempts to buy a firearm, we need to say, no, not until we go a little further. We need to have due process in case there's someone who's denied a firearm purchase who rightfully should have a firearm, but we can all agree that someone who is he's walking around with bags of dead cats. And the police know it, the school knows it, his grandmother knows it, his parents, everyone knows that this individual should not have a firearm.
Absolutely.
And by the way,
absolutely. And you make a good point, but at the end of the day, this is yet another school shooting. There is no database to speak of. There are none of these regulations to speak of. At the end of the day, people can still go out and buy a gun willy-nilly, no matter what their mental state is, and shoot up whoever they like with a military-style rifle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will tell you this. I'll give a chapter or verse on shooters who've done more damage with handguns. It's not. And by the way, the single worst school massacre in U.S. history happened in 1927. Not a single shot fired. So, and the firearms were not involved. The problem is we're not focusing on the people in our midst, basically, who are telling us well in advance, I'm going to do something, I'm going to hurt a lot of people. And yet, what do? We do nothing. There is no mechanism, whether it's to interdict early and try to treat these people, or, by goodness gracious, to make sure that they do not get their hands on a firearm of any type, nor any other dangerous instrumentality. This guy shouldn't have been driving a car, for goodness sakes.
Certainly sounds like it. David, we'll have to leave it there. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. David Katz, the CEO of Global Security Group.